So welcome back to the episode of the BioHub. Today, we're delighted to welcome on Christina Coughlin, the CEO of Avacta Therapeutics and an extraordinary leader at the forefront of next-generation cancer therapeutics. Christina's career spans academic medicine and industry leadership, and trained as an oncologist and immunologist at the University of Pennsylvania. She held earlier roles in her career at Pfizer, Novartis, and Wyeth, and she's led clinical, translational, and regulatory programs in biotech companies, including Immunocore, Rubius, Tmunity, and most recently served as CytoImmune Therapeutics CEO, and now at the helm of Avacta. The company are expanding the reach of highly potent cancer therapies with their unique precision platform. So join us today as we'll discuss Avacta's pipeline, what's next for Avacta, and her transition from a CMO to CEO. So Christina, thanks so much for coming on. How are you?
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me, Tom.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So look, let's just start off with a little bit about your journey through the field. So you trained as a physician-scientist and then built a career leading clinical development before stepping into the CEO role. What first drew you into oncology and the translational side of medicine?
So I always wanted to be a physician as long as I could remember. My parents will tell you that I first started um, making noise about that perhaps when I was even as young as 6 years old. But I had a short moment in life, late teens, early 20s, where three gentlemen in my life all died of cancer. So my grandfather, who was probably one of my biggest fans, my godfather, my uncle, and then my best friend's father, who everybody's got that best friend. We're growing up, you've got this other set of parents. And so Big Ted was my other dad. And that impacted me as a really young person. And I still remember saying goodbye to my grandpa before he died and telling him I was going to do something against this disease. So I've been at war with cancer since late teens, early 20s. And, it kind of feels like the last several years of my career are kind of, coming to, we're really starting to make strides in this disease. And I'm thrilled that Avacta is really taking a leadership role in the forefront. We'll talk about some of our new announcements.
Nice. And for people that might not be as familiar with Avacta, can you just give us a quick overview of what the company does and what makes its approach to cancer therapeutics unique?
Sure. So there are many drugs out there that are very effective against cancer. Killing cells is easy, but killing tumor cells without killing the patient actually turns out to be somewhat tricky. So if you imagine my phone is just a molecule of a drug that is able to kill a rapidly dividing cell or a cancer cell, and that's chemotherapy or targeted therapies, we can use both. But this drug doesn't know the difference between the GI tract, the bone marrow, the hair follicles, some of the normal tissues that they impact, or the tumor. Avacta's technology, I have fallen in love with it because it's so exquisitely simple. We take a small little piece of a protein. It's called a peptide. It has 2 amino acids, so it's still a small molecule. It's still a chemical. We're not making biologic drugs. We take this tiny little piece of a peptide and we stick it to the drug. What that does is a very simple change. This drug can now not get into the GI tract. It can't get into the bone marrow, can't get into the follicles. It can't even get into the tumor. But the peptide is designed such that the peptide is only removed once it sees the tumor. It's removed by an enzyme that's only expressed in the tumor. And so that does two things. Number one, it protects all of these normal tissues here from the toxic effects of this drug, but it also takes this highly active drug and concentrates it. Imagine 50,000 cell phones here. It concentrates the drug right in the tumor where it is supposed to be. So it's exquisitely simple. And we've got a couple of advantages. The first is because this is it's a small molecule, it's a chemical. We have some brilliant medicinal chemists who have worked on both sides of it, made some real improvements in the peptide. And so the whole idea of the platform is to protect normal tissues from the toxic effects of the drug, concentrate it right in the tumor microenvironment. That's exactly how we should be using these highly effective cancer therapies.
Nice. That sounds exciting. And so Avacta, so you're currently listed on the London Stock Exchange.
Correct.
There's been potential that you may consider like a NASDAQ listing at a later point as well. What was the thinking behind that? And what do you think access to the US markets could mean for growth at Avacta?
Yeah. So if you look at our pipeline and some of the new announcements that we've made, we have a first drug that is finishing its expansion cohorts outside of the phase 1. That one is called faradoxorubicin. We just reported updated clinical data from that one at ESMO last week in Berlin. We also have a second drug coming to the clinic, and Tom, I'll be honest with you, I've nicknamed this one the Beast. It's based on a topoisomerase 1 inhibitor, exatecan, which is one of the most potent of the topo ones. It's a very broadly applicable um, anti-cancer drug class, the topoisomerase ones, and so it was sort of a natural fit for a second precision medicine for us to make. But the third one that we just announced a little over a week ago is a dual payload technology. So we've now taken, if you imagine, here's the peptide, but we're now able to attach two drugs to the peptide. And so I mentioned our chemists led by Francis, our VP of chemistry, but they've really come up with some really novel ways of doing this. And so that technology wasn't announced until, we had complete comfort that both were releasing but if you think about it, with a second drug going to the clinic, and that one should get started in the first quarter of next year, but then that dual payload is on a fast track to show up in the clinic soon. We're going to need access to some larger pots of capital as we move forward. And so the idea here is to access some of those NASDAQ, biotech investors, a little bit deeper pockets. And the company, as you can tell from my accent and our CFO, the company is now on both shores. We have a number of members of the management team and the clinical and regulatory teams who are here in the States. And our bricks and mortar, our labs, and our scientists are all in London. We see each other, somewhat frequently. But it's really it's access to capital and access to those biotech specialist investors as well.
Nice. And just on capital, I saw that you guys, alongside the clinical data, had also done a successful fundraising round as well. So congratulations on that as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's not a huge raise, but one that keeps us, let's say, funded until deeper into the second half of next year through some key data points, through getting, that next drug into the clinic. So number of key points that will come, and, a lot of time to figure out. There's lots of levers that we can pull for funding. But it gave us a bit of a top up and runway into the second half of next year.
Nice. Yeah, because I know any fundraising round at the moment, no matter how little or large, is just super
Yeah.
difficult to close. So, yeah, congratulations. That's
Thank
good
you.
to
We
hear.
appreciate it. Thank you.
And you mentioned that the current breakdown of the team. So you're based in the US, but the bulk of the team are based in the UK. How would you balance being a UK-based biotech with a growing US footprint? And what do you think some of the advantages or challenges that global split brings?
It's a great question. I get this question all the time. How do you possibly handle, sort of being on different shores? So the key advantage, especially in a company that has figured out how to work virtually, which I would say that Avacta is expert at it. We use a technique that we call team days, which is when everybody meets over in White City, London, and the teams get together to share sort of, in-person feedback, deep, team meetings. Each individual team will have several hours of meetings over the course of a couple days. Outside of that, then, clinical, regulatory, those functions, clinical operations, those functions are pretty much all virtual. I'm located in Philadelphia, which is just in between New York and Washington. Our CFO, Brian, is located right outside of Washington, D.C. Our CMO is actually in California. Um, the advantage is it does create sort of a willingness of the team to make things work. So, for example, Dave, our CMO, he's an early riser, and so there's many days that he's on by 4 or 5 a.m. Same is true for Brian and myself. With working with teams in London, we start really early. We're both early risers. If there's one good thing that came out of the pandemic, I think it's this whole concept of being able, learning how to work virtually, learning how to hold a team meeting virtually. The big advantage that we get, if you think about it, I think before the pandemic, when I would hire people, it was always about the person relocating. If we found an ideal person in a different geography, I wouldn't have considered before this hiring a CMO and keeping him in California. And yet, Dave, who's incredibly experienced, very similar to myself, he's had a long career. He's done more INDs than I have, but he is in California. And no, he's not going to move. He's willing to travel, and he's willing to get up super early and get the work done when he needs to get done. And so, the key advantage here is in hiring. We can hire the best people for the job as long as they're willing a few times a year to get on a plane and come over to London, and willing to sort of work within those shared hours that we have. And so it has created almost like a team unity among the various folks. And I'm really proud of our teams and what they've been able to accomplish. If you look at, I joined Avacta at the beginning, full time as an employee at the beginning of last year. I love telling the story of the actual data slide of the tumor concentration of really getting the drug to concentrate over here in the tumor at the board. So I was a director starting 3 years ago, and it was that slide and looking at it and thinking there's nothing else that concentrates to that level in the tumor. And it was that slide and those data that I started to say in the back of my brain, like, I got to figure out how to get a job at this company, because the technology is just so unusual in that it's a small molecule. It's not even a biologic drug, and yet we're able to release 2 payloads. We're out in the front of things. We're a dual payload technology where you've only seen that with ADCs that have that big antibody, biologic component. So we're pretty excited about what we've been able to do. It's a tiny little team. There's only 24 full-time employees at Avacta. And yet, if you look at what we've accomplished over the last couple of years, I am incredibly proud of this team, just incredibly proud of them. And being able to function in a virtual world, it's not easy. It's not. But we have great respect for each other and just have just incredible teams, all united in this war on cancer.
Nice. I can imagine having people in the UK as well. It's probably good for cash runway as well. The salaries compared to the US are a lot less than in the UK. So I'm sure it's probably good from a cash side of things as well.
I think and not having this, but not having those big relocation costs. Zoom is quite cost effective, and it's really learning to work within that virtual environment that makes this a true possibility for us.
Nice. Are there any challenges of operating with sort of part of the team sort of scattered around in different bits? Is there any problems or challenges that come with that?
So I think probably a couple of the big ones are the time zone, the different time zones. We're everywhere from Pacific time in the U.S. Over to Central European time, because a couple of our really key consultants are over in Europe. That's number one. I think that being able to function as a team completely virtually is a skill set that is underappreciated. It's hard to have conflict over a Zoom meeting. It's a specific sort of commitment to a team and commitment to communication that I think makes it a really special group of people. But it's also the leaders that we have in the company who have, sort of taken the bull by the horns and really working with, personalities over Zoom. It's not easy. It's a shared experience. It's an interesting shared experience, but we have across the board, a very small committed group that wants to make this company a success. And the Margaret Mead quote is one of my favorites. Never doubt that a small committed group of citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And there is a shared sense of purpose at Avacta. It's one of my favorite teams that I've ever worked with.
Nice. And just to delve into Avacta's pipeline a little bit more, so it's often described as best in class for targeted chemotherapy and peptide drug conjugates. What are you most excited about in the current development portfolio?
So up until we announced the dual payload, I think a lot of people out there that knows Avacta knows me and the management team would recognize that my favorite was going to be the beast. So our exatecan peptide drug conjugate. So this is the most potent topoisomerase 1 inhibitor. Now we know that topo 1 from an oncologist, if I put my oncologist hat on, we know that topo 1 is a very broadly active mechanism in cancer therapy. And this is the most potent topo 1 that's ever been in the clinic. It was developed by Daiichi back in the late 90s, early 2000s, has been in probably close to 1,000 patients, to be honest with you, among all the various phase 2s and whatnot. I think there's a couple of key messages that came out of that development was exatecan is much more potent, and so it's active even when other topo 1s have failed or when the tumor has resisted other topo 1s. That was published in a phase 2 breast cancer study. It's also very highly membrane permeable. So if you think about our mechanism, the payload, my phone, is released extracellularly. So FAP, when it removes it, this is outside of the cell. So we need those drugs to be able to move into a FAP negative tumor cell. That's the bystander effect. So that aspect of the drug is critically important. But the third is it had a PK. One of the reasons that it failed in the clinic was that it had a very short exposure, very short half-life. And so we had to invent this concept of a sustained release mechanism. And Francis and the chemistry team literally went away and modified both ends of the peptide in order to create this sustained release. With our most recent one, which is the dual payload system, they took those inventions and took them even a step further to find 2 binding sites to get 2 different drugs to release. We're quite confident that we are the first peptide drug conjugate to actually invent a dual payload system. The advantages there are pretty much twofold. Number one, it has much better tumor penetration. There's no big antibody next to it that's going to have a hard time getting into the tumor. These are small molecules. They're just small molecule drugs. But the second advantage is manufacturing. We don't need a biologic manufacturing platform. Ours are just pure small molecules. We buy the 2 payloads, the pens. We manufacture the peptide. This is 2 amino acids and together. So it's a small molecule manufacturing, and that tumor penetration, like some of the new data that we have with the sustained release mechanism, we get it right into the tumor, release the payload immediately. And that's evidence of tumor penetration. So, yeah, we're super excited about, the next things coming for Avacta. I think that, what our chemists, what our scientists have been able to do is just, it's groundbreaking, to be honest with you. And I don't use that word lightly, but it's groundbreaking what they've been able to do with this platform.
Yeah, nice. And it's obviously quite a crowded field, targeted oncology. What do you think makes it, or what do you think makes Avacta's science different from some of the competitors out there?
Yeah, so it is. You're 100% correct. It is a very crowded field, from targeted therapies all the way through to biologics and whatnot. I think there's a couple of things that make Avacta very different. The first is we're repurposing drugs that we already know they work. So, for example, exatecan, topo 1, we know it works. It didn't make it to the market, but we've seen in phase 2 trials that it shrinks tumors, and it even shrinks tumors that are topo 1 resistant, which is one of the reasons that so so we're repurposing mechanisms that we know work. We can turn off and dramatically reduce toxicity. And that's what was really important in our ESMO presentation. We presented the long-term cardiac safety data, and it shows that, even out to very large lifetime maximums, we aren't seeing any cardiac toxicity from that drug. So proof of concept for the platform, attaching this peptide to this drug really does protect all of those normal tissues. And it's putting those two ideas together that really widen the therapeutic index for existing drugs. It's an important mechanism, reducing the toxicity, but by concentrating, we're also going to increase the efficacy. And so it's a very different approach. We're taking, almost fallen angels, drugs that we know have anti-tumor activity, and making them safer and concentrating them right where they should be. It's kind of a crazy idea if you think about it, but it's so simple, this platform, that we're thrilled to move into the next chapter.
Nice. And just a little bit into your journey and how you got to where you are today. So your background is you're a chief medical officer phenotype, which I guess is a less traditional route to CEO. You often see
It is.
chief business officers, chief commercial officers, so on and so forth. How did you find that transition initially, and what advice would you give to others who are looking to make a similar sort of step up when they're ready for it?
Yeah. So I've always been intrigued by the business aspects, especially with, a few different roles as chief medical officer. I was often, to be honest with you, left out of a lot of the business discussions, because why bother? Why bother the CMO? They're supposed to be taking care of the medicine. But I've always been intrigued by the business side of things. And the transition, I think you don't know what you don't know. And to be honest with you, the learning curve has been so steep on the business side of things. I think the best piece of advice that I got actually from um, our our Avacta board of directors, who are just a fantastic group. But the best piece of advice in taking this job was the first and the most important hire was going to be the CFO. And, we do have aspirations ultimately to potentially move to the NASDAQ. And so finding that financial mind to sit next to the R&D CEO is, and they're right, it probably was one of the most important hires. And in Brian Hahn, we have, a gentleman who has been with NASDAQ listed companies, public experience, and knows how to navigate the different exchanges. We've both had, a tremendous learning curve, understanding the London Stock Exchange, but also has been a lot of work moving towards, ultimately where we can find the capital for the company, which will be as we move towards the Nasdaq. And we're excited to sort of get this company to its next chapter.
Nice. Was it difficult in the initial stages to sort of take your clinical hat off and focus on other areas of business, given that I guess you now have a CMO, but was that harder in the earlier days?
So it's a great question, and I'll often say at our leadership team meetings, I'll say to Dave, I'm like, you have the hardest job because I know how to do your job. But Dave and I have a very good relationship, very good collaboration. We both have different experiences out there. Um, I do attempt, I will say, to stay out of the medicine and let Dave do his job. I think what you'll see, though, in the most recent of our investor meet presentations, where Dave and I presented the ESMO data together. Primarily, though, Dave presented the data, and that's the way it should be. The CMO is in charge of the medicine, and I try not to step on his toes, but we do have very good discussions. I'll say one of my favorite was, as he came in and took over the beast. I already had sort of my preconceived notions of how it was gonna be developed, and, I'll be honest with you, Dave took some of it, and he said, "We're not gonna do this." We had a knockdown, drag out debate about, the diseases, the indications, for this one going forward, and it's been a fantastic collaboration, and for both of us, it's recognizing that, you know, where I can step in and where I should really just get out and let him crack on with things.
Nice. And you mentioned before, obviously, the bulk of the team in the UK, some of the team in the US. How have you sort of managed to maintain a strong and unified across those different time zones?
So that's actually really important to us, really important. As we start to, um, you know, expand on both shores. I did this once before with Immunocore. I was the first U.S. employee at Immunocore, and sort of moving over to the States, it brings its own set of challenges, and really keeping the team focused and united on sort of the goals is critically important. Finding and seeing those conflicts, because every team is going to have conflicts. Every team is going to have, those challenges as you go forward, and managing those and jumping in, advising and whatnot. I will say, we have a great team in the UK. We have a great new small team in the US, and it's keeping that shared mindset and really getting in there, seeing each other every few months um, is critical. But keeping everyone focused and unified. I always say this, there's nothing like an IND to align people. It's us against the world getting that drug into the clinic. It's probably one of the hardest things is to take this pile of science and move it into a clinical trial. But they're 100% united on that right now, and we're really looking forward to moving the beast into the clinic.
Nice. And this is a question we always finish with on the BioHub, and I know I wanted to give you a bit of a heads up with it as well. But if you were to have dinner with any three people, past or present, who would you go for and why?
So let me start with Abraham Lincoln. So he was probably one of the people out there with grit and an idea, and he just would never give up on it. Never give up on it. Um, I think that learning from him, some of that negotiating power would be absolutely fantastic, and learning from him in terms of, I just think of him, grit. I think is so important in this field of biotech. Really having that vision of what you see your life and your career being, and sticking to it. And I think he was one of the ones out there. The other person that I would love to sit and have dinner with, would be my grandfather. So I was his favorite grandchild. Some of my cousins will probably disagree with me there. But as he was dying of cancer, and I think he knew that he was dying of cancer, and one of the last things that I was able to tell him was that I had gotten into Penn, University of Pennsylvania, for medical school and for my PhD. And I'd love to just be able, and he died not too long after that, but I'd love to be able to go back and talk to him and tell him and say, you know what, look what I did here. And the the other person, to be honest with you, a lot of our investors know that I'm a huge, huge Philadelphia sports fan. But I would like to somehow get myself invited to one of the Phillies team dinners. That team is so incredible, and I actually have watched some of their team dynamics, and it's them versus the world. And so I'd love to sort of it's been talked about as one of the great cultures out there of team dynamics. So those are my three dinners. Abe Lincoln, my grandpa, and I'd love to get just some insights into the team workings of the Philadelphia Phillies.
Nice. Yeah, but I love all of those answers. And sounds like what you're building at Avacta is super exciting, and obviously you've made a lot of really good recent progress as well. So yeah, I'm excited to follow you guys going forward. And thanks again for coming on and
Thanks for the time. Yeah, great to talk to you. Great conversation, and thanks for the time, Tom.